Okay, good evening. Welcome to 2022. This is the planning board meeting of January 16th. This meeting is recorded by video and audio in accordance with the state open meeting law pursuant to section 20 of chapter 20 and the acts of 2021. Thank you, Greg. This meeting will be conducted by remote participation. Additionally, all votes taken by the planning board during this and future remote meetings will be by roll call vote. If there is a public comment period and if you are calling in on a phone, you can press *9 or *9 to request to speak. If you are watching on a computer or a device, there is a raised hand button that you can press to request to speak. So the meeting's called to order. I'd like to introduce the planning board members and staff. Rick Noonan, the chair, Beverly Bookin, Hank McCarl, our senior member, Doug Cook, Sean Henry, Greg Catamatori, our planning director, and Jane Ramson. First on the agenda this evening is a continued site plan review application submitted by 58 Great Republic Drive, LLC, to conduct a marijuana cultivation and manufacturing establishment at 58 Great Republic Drive, Assessors Map 263, Lot 18. And Greg, do we have a representative this evening?
Let me just see if they are in the participants.
Mr. Chair, I'm here. This is Scott Cameron.
There's Scott
from the Moore and Cameron Group. How are you all tonight?
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you for having us. Again, Scott Cameron with Moore and Cameron Group. We have a place of business at 66 Elm Street in Danvers, Massachusetts. And we are here tonight for the continued hearing. We've had a couple of different meetings on this. Our first one we presented, just to refresh memories, we presented the initial site design. We were just receiving comments in from staff at that time. At the meeting just before the holiday, we had Rebecca Brown on from GPI. She presented the traffic. We talked through that a little bit. And today I was hoping just to walk you through briefly the updates on the site plan based on the staff comments, primarily, and also obviously your board comments that we incorporated in. And my understanding is through some correspondence today that engineering is good with the current design. The adjustments we made are satisfactory. And we'll go from there. If that sounds like a plan of attack for tonight, Mr. Chair.
Yep, Scott, go ahead. The floor is yours.
May I share my screen?
Yeah, you should be able to do so as a panelist.
Okay. I always like to ask. All right. So let's start with the site plan. So we talked about this a little bit at the last meeting. There were some concerns expressed about about overparking the property. And so we did a deeper dive at the parking ratios based on what we initially would be a very comfortable parking ratio to what we can work with comfortably based on the current business plan and the maximum shift and shift changes. So we did pare back the parking down to 70 spaces, and the areas where we took out a lot of parking were along this edge of the property here. These were all parallel spaces, and the same coming down the side here. These were all parallel spaces. And in doing so, not only did we reduce the pavement, but another one of our internal objectives as a team, we furthered the earthwork impacts of the project and got the site closer to closer to a balanced condition, although there's still an export with this particular property that we just can't avoid. But we took the opportunity to kind of double up. So we're not excavating as close to the property line in this area. You can see the limit of work went from following the lot line all the way down to now we have a good healthy 15 and 20 foot buffer in areas along that lot line where we're cutting. And then we had a retaining wall along this lot line before, and that's now gone. We're able to eliminate that because we got some more space on the edge here. So we made those changes to the plans. Otherwise, on the site, there weren't a lot of other changes to the footprint. The turnaround didn't change. The location of the utilities, building, all of that remained the same. However, in the back, I do want to call your attention. As part of the engineering studies and doing our, continuing our due diligence, we had been working with an older wetland delineation. We had Bill Manuel from Wetlands and Land Management go out and take a look at that and make sure he was comfortable that things hadn't changed since he was out there years ago. And in fact, he did find that things had changed a little bit. And in particular, up in this corner here, the wetlands have come up slope a little bit from where they were when he was last out there about 8 years ago. So he did reestablish a new delineation here, and what that did is it did push some buffer zone further into the project that we just can't avoid. But we did take the opportunity again, and I'll show you on the grading plan, to make the property work better with the topography. So we did actually eliminate a lot of the retaining walls and structure in the back of the property. And although we are in the buffer zone, we haven't extended the limit of work at all from what was there before. And we anticipate filing with the Conservation Commission following the conclusion of the site plan process, which is the procedure outlined in the Wetlands Protection Act. So moving along to the grading. So most of our efforts involved the big concern from engineering was our previous design. We had water discharging to the back of the property, and there's kind of a 2-terrace wetland system. So if you can imagine, I didn't delineate the back side of this, but there's kind of a closed system here, and then there's a little connection, oops, and then it kind of continues off in that direction. And there's an elevation change between them. The water, it's lower on this lower system. So the engineer asked us to redesign it and change the direction of the water. So what we did is we changed it so the water goes into the upper wetland system. So we've got that impoundment area. We're not using that to mitigate, but the water's there to start. Then it goes into the next kind of tier down, and then eventually this goes down towards Eastern Ave. The other thing we did, which was, I guess, more significant, is we normally stormwater, the standard of design is we mitigate flow, which is, so it's your peak rate of runoff. We don't necessarily look at the total water running off the property, that's volume. We look at the rate, because it's the peaks that cause our flooding. It's when all these areas from all over start coinciding, and you get that pink rainfall of, you feel it in the rain events. You get that 15-20 minutes where it's just coming down hard, and we do measure that and look at that. So flow rate, and we look at that peak flow rate to design. In this case, we took an additional step to look at the volume, and in addition to mitigating flow, which is the requirement, mitigating volume, which is not required, but certainly does a lot to help out the downstream impacts of this project. So we did re-engineer the stormwater basin. We raised it up a little bit. We made it a little bigger. We pushed it back. We're not going into the buffer zone again. We are keeping most of the work. There's kind of a ridge here that extends out this way. So we're keeping most of the work on the other side of that ridge and kind of building into it on the other side. And we engineered this to mitigate volume as well. So that water is held on site. It's slowly infiltrated back into the ground. And yes, it will eventually make its way either above ground or below ground back to the same watershed, but we're slowing that down. And anytime we get water in the ground, we try to do it. There's all sorts of good stuff that happens when we get the surface water into the ground. So we did take the additional steps. We went above and beyond. And I'll defer to Greg on engineering response to that, as I don't have a formal letter yet, but I do have an email. But that was the big focus. We did also change the grades dimension. We had our biggest cut through here. So we did change the grading along the side of the building, working with the foundation system. So it's actually going to be the building will be partially buried on that side. So it would only appear as, you can see the slabs at 147. The finished grade here is up at 152. So we did work with that. So we're going to work with the foundation system to minimize some of that cutting. Same thing on the other side of the building, where the road will actually come up above the slab and then go back down. So we're getting creative with both the site design and integrating that into the building design, which I thought was really helpful with from the architecture team on the project. I did include in your packets the technical narrative and all the calculations. I won't go through that, but that's in your package. I did, oops, I'm sorry, I'm having some file access issues. I did also include a swept path analysis, which was a request of the fire department. They'd asked us to model a fire truck. And I think that file just crashed, but that was included in your packet. And that does show the fire truck turnaround and it's plenty clear with, of course, the site's designed for big trucks. We didn't have to change much with the utilities. That information is still on the plan. I just want to get to the landscape plan in a moment here. Sorry, these files, when I'm on the Zoom calls, can kind of slow down. So we did work in some additional trees into the design. So we cut this back, worked in some more trees. We added a tree here, the trees here, to try and make this, you know, especially the front area of the property a little more attractive. So these will couple as both screening, and all the plants in the plan are all native species. So you can find everything here locally to the extent that the supply, you know, the supplies are available, but everything is typically available. And we didn't have to change much with the lighting either. That plan didn't really change. So the lighting's all the same. We just pulled back some of the parking along these edges. So we still have plenty of coverage for the lighting. And again, I don't know if we covered it, but as just the flow of the property, I think this question came up. When the trucks come into the property and they head around the back, you can kind of imagine your raw product will come into the back of the building. Your waste disposal will also be here. So your dumpster will also be in the back of the building. And then the finished product would come out of the front. So there's with a smaller truck, so it's be a van or a small box truck would be able to back into this area. This isn't a ramp, it's all like grade, a garage door. So product in the back, out the front. And the main offices are in this front corner here with your handicap parking. Everything is MAAB compliant. So I think, you know, we've done a lot of polishing and cleaning and addressing of comments. I don't have much more to present other than getting into a deeper dive on a technical basis. So I guess I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, on any questions, comments.
Thank you, Scott, for that. And we certainly appreciate the work that you've done. I think Beverly's nodding her head in approval. And so I would solicit any questions or comments from the board, Beverly.
Since we're going to have a storm tomorrow, do you have to, don't you have to document on the site plan where snow removal or snow storage, on-site snow storage is?
Yeah, so we're not anticipating, you know, we have a lot of landscape in front, so we're going to utilize the perimeter areas, mainly on this side where we can push the snow up against the cut slope and store it there where it's not going to be protruding above the ground. So that the area we designated is along this side here of the building for the snow storage. And this isn't the plowed snow. This is if they actually have to move it. Usually they're out there with the loader. Of course, around all the perimeter of the property, typically you're going to get the snow pushed just from the plows pushing the snow. And everything more or less is designed so the water, the snow melt will come back into a paved area and go through the drainage system.
Thank you. And again, thank you for looking at the parking. I think it was really a mutual effort to find a way of reducing that. And I think it'll be less costly for you. And it just means we have less parking spaces. So thank you again.
Thank you, Beverly. Any other comments, Jane?
Yes, did your the increased buffer zone necessitate going back to our Conservation Commission, or are you doing that?
Yeah, we had initially planned to file an abbreviated notice of resource area delineation to just lock in the wetland line. Our initial design, we weren't anticipating working in the buffer zone. When we did a deeper dive to double check, the delineation we had was older. It was from the early 2010s timeframe, from some work the prior owner had done. So we went back out to double check that. The wetland scientists determined that it had actually come up the slope for whatever reason. Usually the plants can chase a stormwater discharge or something, will come up slope. But anyway, so we did update that. We did survey it, and that pushed the buffer zone out. So the limit of work didn't change, but the actual wetland footprint came up close to the site. So instead of an abbreviated notice of resource area delineation, we're going to file a notice of intent with the Conservation Commission. Either way, we're going to permit with them, but we'll have a little bit, and this will just be for site work and grading in the buffer zone. There's no structures or building.
Right. Thank you, Jane. Any other comments? Good, thank you. Greg, any final comments?
Yeah, I think, we saw most of these revisions in concept at the last meeting. The submission was made right after the planning board meeting and farmed back out to staff for review. I did hear from Ryan Marks. He's satisfied with the changes that have made to the drainage design. And I think the fire staff basically said, there are things that they're going to have to examine more closely as they get the final building design. But from the site perspective, it was acceptable with the swept path analysis. That 20-foot access around the entire building is what they're typically looking for. That's provided for. The only thing that I think we heard and as things are starting to move towards design, I know there's a foundation permit that's been started. So that seems to be something that's fairly locked in. I'm just wondering if there were any more decisions on, there was some discussion around potentially renewables and cogeneration. Is that something that's coming closer to fruition or understanding whether it's going to be included or something that's still, something that's adaptable and might be added in the future?
That's you, Scott.
Sure. I wasn't sure if that was me or not, but so to give the company response to their agenda here, they are fully committed to making the project as sustainable and as efficient as possible. We have reserved the area on the plan to adapt it to a cogeneration system. The building has been designed to hold HVAC and mechanical systems on the roof to optimize the footprint. We don't have answers yet for you at this phase on what the extent of that will be. It's way too early in the process. Things are going out to contractors, proprietary vendors, so they're still very much in their process of the construction design. But they are committed to doing everything they can to make it as efficient as possible. I think the team recognizes and appreciates the value of sustainability as part of their business plan.
Appreciate that, Scott. Thank
Thanks.
you. Any other comments? Seeing none, Jane, like to take a crack at a motion?
I move that we approve the site plan review application for 58 Great Republic Drive.
I'll second it.
Okay, just an amendment to that. We're going to reference Assessor's Map 263, Lot 18. We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, Greg?
Okay, Member Noonan,
Yes.
Member McCarl,
Yes.
Member Bookin,
Yes,
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
and Member Remsen.
Yes.
And Member Rosen is absent. Okay,
Great.
you're all set, Scott.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thanks for the
great
good
night,
work. Okay, so the first of our public hearings this evening, pursuant to Section 20 of Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, in accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 4, and the rules and regulations governing the subdivision of land in Gloucester, the Gloucester Planning Board to consider a 3-lot definitive subdivision application titled Back Shore Place, submitted by, I gotta find my place again. Consider the subdivision applications titled Back Shore Place, submitted by Frank Tedesco for a subdivision of land to permit 3 lots at 227 Atlantic Road, Assessor's Map 276 and Lot 50. Mr. Judd is here as a representative.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. On behalf of Frank Tedesco, I believe is attending this meeting tonight virtually, as well as Deb Ellison, who is helping out with the legal aspects of this property at it's 227 Atlantic Road is the street address for this property that we appeared before you in June. Greg, I'm not sure if you want to put up the plans that we had submitted on your screen, if that's okay.
I can
to
do that.
Yeah. So what you see there is the profile sheet of the existing way that goes in to be known if approved as Backshore Place. This would be the 3-lot subdivision with 3 single-family dwellings as shown on the plan. This was a very similar plan to the one that was presented back on June 3rd to the planning board of last year. And essentially using the existing way that exists out there, the existing travel way, I should say, is a gravel surface at this time. And as you may recall, we were approved by the Conservation Commission to improve the surface of that existing gravel way to be pervious asphalt. So you see to the right, lower right hand of the screen that Greg has up is a porous asphalt cross section that was approved by the Conservation Commission with an order of conditions. So the proposal is to continue to use that way, improve it with the pervious asphalt, bring in subsurface utilities, sewer and subsurface water with a hydrant, and construct a T turnaround as shown on the plan. We did include a sweat path analysis as required by Chief Smith. And again, the lots are similar to what was shown on the preliminary plan, and they would all be accessed off of the proposed T turnaround as shown there. You have lot 1 being 62,000 square feet, lot 2 would be 53,000, and the lot 3 would be over 426,000. That would encompass a good portion of the wetland area that exists on the property. And again, we are connecting to city sewer, which exists out in Atlantic Road, and pretty straightforward as far as the proposed driveways as shown on the plan. We can answer any questions at this time. And again, Deb is here and Frank is here as well to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, John. So why don't we hold the board first before we take public comment? Are there any questions or clarifications at this point from the planning board? Hearing none. This is a public hearing. This is a definitive subdivision application for 227 Atlantic Road, Assessors Map 76, Lot 50. So I would like to ask any of the participants that are attending this evening if you'd like to speak in favor of this subdivision, definitive subdivision plan. I ask that anybody that signed in without a first and last name, please correct your participation name so you can be identified as a public hearing. We won't take public comment unless you're properly identified. So if you'd like to make a comment in favor of this application, you can raise your hand, you'll be recognized. I will ask you to state your name and address for the record, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes. Somebody's trying to help.
And Mary, you should be able to speak.
You find your mute button, Mary.
Good evening. Hi, my name's Mary Bennett, and my husband and I, John R. Ross, own the property adjacent and abutting 227 Atlantic Road. My husband and I bought the property in March of 1996. When we purchased the property, our architect and real estate agent mentioned that there was a covenant on the property by Margaret Farrell Lynch, and that only one home could be put at the end of the property. So Mr. Tedesco purchased the property from Mr. Prokopis in 2003, and he agreed to the terms of the sale and of the covenant that was placed by Mrs. Lynch. I was advised this week that Mr. Prokopis released the restrictions and conditions on the deed in November of 2006. I didn't receive, or I don't know if any abutters received any notice of that, or if we were expected to receive any notice of that. I only have a question and a concern. And my question is, can Margaret Lynch's covenant that Mr. Prokopis and Mr. Tedesco both agreed to, can that be eliminated by Mr. Prokopis in 2006 if he no longer own the property? And should any and all changes be made by the executors of Margaret Farrell Lynch or their heirs? And the other concern that I had was just the wetlands on both sides of the road. Our home has no basement, and the driveway on 227 Atlantic Road has been raised 4.5 feet in some areas. And I'm just concerned about additional traffic and, like snow, the plowing of snow. So that is just my question and my concern, and I hope you can answer it for me.
Thank you, Mary. We're going to leave the first part of your question to somebody with a more advanced degree than me. I'm not going to touch that one. And I guess, John, if you wanted to address some of the water table, snow plowing type of issue, I think that a little bit of it should be addressed in the driveway design for you.
Sure, well, I can take that, and then maybe Deb can address that covenant issue, if I could, Mr. Chairman. As pointed out, we are proposing a pervious asphalt mix. Those of you that have seen the actual functioning of a asphalt surface, it does absorb surface runoff fairly well. Right now, you have more or less a packed gravel surface out there, so we'd expect a more pervious situation out there, because if you look at the section view of the pervious asphalt on the plan, you can see the substantial amount of 3/4 inch stone that is inherent as part of the functioning design of the pervious asphalt technology. So you actually should see a better absorption rate of that surface relative to that existing driveway being raised. That was raised, as you may know, years ago by Mr. Prokopis, who was the previous owner. There's a fairly substantial culvert that goes about midway down that driveway that exists now. And again, that's all going to remain the same in terms of the functioning of that water system. So we don't expect any exacerbation of any kind of flooding on either side of that roadway, because we have free flowing water system through that culvert. So I'm not sure if that answers all the questions, Mr. Chairman, but
I think that covers it.
Yeah.
Attorney Ellison, you want
Yes,
to take
for
a
the
crack at
record.
the first part?
For the record, Deborah Ellison, Ellison Law Office, 63 Middle Street, Gloucester. This property is registered land, which means that the land court lists certain encumbrances, et cetera, on a certificate of title. The certificate of title refers to the restrictions that were put on the property by Mr. Prokopis. And those were put on the property in the deed to the Tedescos in 2003. in 2006, Mr. Prokopis removed those, and there was a release that was recorded with the registered land section of the land court releasing that. So from what I have seen, and I do admit I have not done a full title, but what I've seen from the land court certificate, the covenants or the restrictions on the property with regard to the number of lots have been removed.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any questions from board members on those two topics before we take another public comment? There's Beverly, seeing none. Again, we are in a public hearing setting. Anybody would like to speak in favor of the subdivision, division of property, you can raise your hand, state your name and address for the record, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes. Sue, I believe you've been enabled.
Hi, my name is Susan Kalmakis. I live at 245 Atlantic Road, and I am an abutter to the property. Just, I understand the clarification, but in fact, it wasn't Mr. Prokopis who put those restrictions in place. It was the person from whom he bought the property. I don't know if that makes a difference. But whether he had the right to remove them after having signed a deed accepting them.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Deb, are you still there?
As I said, with regard to registered land, typically any encumbrance is on the title certificate, and I do not see any encumbrance other than the restrictions that were placed by Mr. Prokopis. And as I said, those were removed.
Okay. Again, thank you. Beverly, do you have a question? Nope. Okay. Okay, anybody that would like to speak against this division of property or subdivision?
Really? Well, if you.
Alice, I believe you're enabled.
Hi, my name is Alice McCarthy, and I live at 61 Grapevine Road. I'm in a abutter on the other side by the wetlands, and I'm not objecting. I just have a clarification, if I may. There's that huge lot, that 460 square foot lot includes a lot of wetlands behind our home and our next door neighbor's home. Will there be an understanding that that is in the deed for that land, that it's not buildable and will remain wetlands, or how does that work when it's because it's deeded, I guess it's now wetlands and can't be built on. I'm just wondering if that's can be changed by somebody who buys that lot.
I think that's a John Judd question.
Okay,
Hi, John.
Hi. So John Judd responding to that question. So I believe Ms. McCarthy is referring to lot 3. That's 426,000 over 9.7 acres. And that is for the most part on the right-hand side as you come up the driveway is all wet, and there's really no chance of that ever being developed based on my inspection of that. It's standing swamp area there, and any work that is proposed within the 100-foot buffer zone would have to be approved by the Conservation Commission. So I just don't see any potential to access anything from Grapevine Road to get into that property, and I don't see any usable area there based on my inspections. And Mike Seecamp had delineated this wetland, and you can see that there's really no access there from Grapevine Road. So I don't see that happening other than what's proposed on our plan.
And again, the catch-all there would be an order of condition from Concom or Conservation Commission if something was to happen. Thank you, Alice. Any other comments from the attendees? Seeing none. Greg, any?
Sure. So, the timing of a couple of the applications that are before us this evening were a little bit tough with the holidays. Staff did meet initially to review the application. There were some questions about kind of the road design in particular in terms of there is really no curbing or anything that's really impeding a vehicle. It is an elevated section of roadway. So there was some concern or question raised about whether there needs to be any type of barrier, just because it is, just kind of off the wayside, in particularly in snowy conditions and that type of thing, in terms of where the actual roadway is and if there's anything impeding a car from going off of it. Perhaps more in particular as you're exiting the turnaround area, it does kind of come down slope on a curve. And again, it's just an elevated roadway that would otherwise have some form of a reveal of boulder on the side. But wasn't clear just with the cross-section detail if that is something that's more elevated above the roadway, or is it really almost kind of a flush situation. I know the road design is designed to absorb the water as well as shed to some degree, with a crowning and pitch to either side. So those were some of the initial comments from the fire safety perspective and just a public safety perspective. The engineering department has started to look at the utility design, and we'll probably have some more questions about its design. So that's kind of where we are, at least from a staff level perspective. It might be important also in the board's consideration as to how this road complies with standard. There are a number of waivers that are also being requested, and that's kind of your typical measuring stick of how this comports to the subdivision regulations. Clearly there are times when waiver is appropriate, and that's something that should be reviewed by the board as well. So it might be helpful for John to summarize that as part of the submission.
That's what we're getting to next. So you did have probably 5 or 6, John, if you wanted to just go through each one of them. I think they were in the folder as well.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on sheet 2 of the definitive plan, we do list the waivers, a lot of which simply just sort of housekeeping with things that may not be applicable to this particular design. So the first one was again, the designer registered landscape architect stamp. We're looking for a waiver of that one. We are looking to retain as many trees as possible along this. But again, we're just following basically that existing, there they are there. Thank you, Greg. The existing cleared way that's going out across the wetland area into the upland area toward the rear of the site. So there's that was the first request. The second was the waiver for the straight face granite curbing requirement, and we're looking to, as Greg pointed out, just use the pervious asphalt and the boulder wall per that section. We would have a slight 6-inch reveal on the boulders that be above that, similar to any other road. So the boulders would have just more or less a slight curbing effect. But again, it would not impede any runoff that would go off to one side or the other should that be needed, because you have the spacing between the boulders that would allow any type of snow melt and so forth. So the third waiver would be lighting. We're not looking to do any street lighting here, obviously, and just have lighting associated with the houses themselves and the street lights at the road. Sidewalks would be the fourth waiver, looking to not construct any sidewalks for this minor street. And the fifth request is for the grass plot that's obviously associated with the sidewalks. So that would not be needed where there are no sidewalks proposed. The sixth waiver would be the nitrogen and phosphorus loading report, because there are no on-site disposal systems here. This would be a city sewer connection. And the design standards for the 500-foot maximum length of the road, this was discussed back in June. We're looking for a 650-foot. The end of that T turnaround at the end would be about 150 feet beyond the 500-foot maximum. And we would have a fire hydrant 620 feet from Atlantic Road where 500-foot spacing is required, maximum. And I believe Greg has met with Chief Smith on this, and I'm not sure if he's opined on that request, but I'm sure he wants the hydrant. As far as the pervious asphalt being allowed for that would be the 9th requested waiver to in lieu of the impervious asphalt that's typically required under the subdivision regulations. And the second to the last waiver would be the looks like we have the we've already requested that, and that was for more or less a duplicate of requested number 7, so that can actually be eliminated. And the final requested waiver is the center line to be less than the 0.5% minimum, because we have a pre-existing more or less flat road that goes out there. The subdivision regulations require a minimum of 0.5% for water flow down a curve, vertical curve, and again, this is flat and would be pervious. So we wouldn't be looking to have any kind of slope of that roadway, a vertical slope that is, to allow for runoff along a curve. And that's it. That's those are the requested waivers.
So board members, do we want to get into the waivers? I think they're, well, if we could maybe leave that up, that would be helpful. I don't know if that was Greg or John.
I believe that was Greg.
Thank you. Yeah. Any concerns with the waivers? I mean, we have 11, so it seems like a lot, but I think as John described, they're reasonable given the context of the subdivision, setback on the property, the wetland. I'm sorry, Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't remember discussing the 500 to 650 foot road length, but maybe I was absent. So I don't really know what the implications of that are. It doesn't seem too drastic. I certainly don't want to agree to the fire hydrant thing unless the fire chief agrees. But all the rest of it is okay with me, as long as the decision includes the boulders that John mentioned. I guess that's the only thing that's not really in there.
Greg, if you want to.
Yeah, I think we can probably get some clarification on, you know, that potential request related to the hydrant. There are certainly situations where, you know, when we have a smaller subdivision with very little water flow, there's always concerns about, you know, stagnant lines and dead end lines. So I know the fire chief, I think, was probably going to try to coordinate with Public Works on the best workable solution. There are some times where, you know, they may not actually request a hydrant because of that potential water quality issue, and whether or not the current system out on Atlantic Road is adequate. But I think we'll get some clarification from the fire chief on that probably in advance of the next meeting.
Jane, just to follow up, was your point on the waiver of maximum length of the lane, or on the fire hydrant placement?
I had a separate point about the length. I don't recall discussing that previously or deciding that it was okay previously.
Okay.
I don't know if the board did that without me, but I don't remember talking about it.
We don't do anything without you, Jane.
Yeah, I mean, this came before the board as just a pre-application. I don't know that everything was articulated at that point. It was more a conceptual review. Again, this is largely due to, you know, the design of the access for the project that was, you know, back in that same era in, you know, the early half of the 2000s when it was constructed. So it is a bit of a retrofit. minimizing by using impervious design rather than trying to design, some sort of collection system for a roadway that's, very flat. So a little bit challenging to do that. It was reviewed by the Conservation Commission for the access. And John, you'd have to remind me, does it also include the extension of the roadway into the subdivision? And then the other elements of the turnaround and the structures would be outside of jurisdiction.
Yeah, everything, if I could, Mr. Chairman, everything that is proposed within the 100-foot buffer has been approved, including the turnaround and the utilities by the Conservation Commission, yeah.
So Jane, you may be
Yeah.
correct that it maybe had not been presented in that context of the actual road length.
Okay, so what is the purpose of keeping a road 500 feet long? Is that just a design thing to keep subdivisions from getting too big?
To a certain extent, I mean, it's, the length of road before there's some sort of, additional connectivity, typically promote so that you don't end up with long dead end roads that would result in traffic queuing at their intersection. I think, to a certain degree, it is a subdivision limitation as well. There are only so many lots that can be yielded, off of a 500-foot roadway. In this case, if you were to think about, a 20-foot roadway, that's, our lane standard, again, that in this district, in a 20,000 square foot district, there's a lot of the frontage that's not being utilized. So, the traffic impact is fairly a minimum. They have suggested, and I'm not sure if it's something that they're providing as a potential condition, that they would be single family homes rather than the potential for 2-family, which is allowed in the district. To a certain degree, without connectivity, there's I think historically there has been some concern about redundancy for emergency access, not having a too long of a dead end road in the event that there's storms, trees down, accidents, those type of thing. The folks on the other side are limited. But the difference between 500 and 650, given the limited frontage, might be a rationale for that increased waiver.
Beverly?
Well, essentially, the subdivision code notwithstanding, this is essentially a 650-foot driveway. It's private driveway that happens to be wide enough to accommodate a fire truck and ambulance turnaround at the end. And it's serving 3 lots, 3 single-family houses. And I gather because they're asking for single family, they can't retrofit it for 2-family without coming back. Am I correct? So this is really just a 3-lot, just a 3 residence subdivision.
If it's volunteered and made a part of the condition of the planning board, then it would have to be revisited by the planning board to do otherwise.
Okay, so it seems to me that while we would prefer not to have 650-foot driveways, that's essentially, it's the lotting pattern out there. And as long, the 2 things that are going for it is, first of all, there is adequate emergency provisions, access, but more importantly, it's being done with a semi-pervious paving, which is appropriate for a road or a driveway that doesn't get much traffic. And so it's doable, something you couldn't do maybe on a street or that got more traffic, but also people can walk up and down it because frankly, there's not that much traffic. I mean, 3 single residences will contribute over a 24-hour period, no more than 12 or 14 trips. So most of the days people can just walk on, and it's wide enough that if a car's coming, you can get out of the way. So to put sidewalks is just extra money and not particularly usable. There's no connectivity. So it seems to me,
yeah.
So it just seems to me that this is a unique situation of land that's stuck behind. It's a flag lot essentially, and I call it a flag lot, a pork chop lot. And essentially, it's being designed like an extra wide driveway.
Thank you, Beverly. Any other comments? Jane?
Yeah, do we need to get to the bottom of the ownership of the lot and the covenants, or does everybody feel comfortable that?
Well, I think Attorney Ellison made the clarification of the registered land, and if she has any further points you might want to clarify, I'm happy to indulge the board.
As you were speaking about the more technical issues, I did look further at some of the deeds for the property, and the Lynch deed has absolutely no restrictions in it at all. And there is a deed from 1916 that has restrictions with regard to the cost of the house that can be built and having no boarding houses. But from 1916, it also only lasted 30 years. So we're well beyond that. So as I said, I haven't done a full title search, but what I can see from the records, there are no restrictions other than the Procopus, which had been released in 2006.
Okay.
Thank you for that confirmation.
Yeah. Thanks for the on the fly research back into the teens. John, a quick question on sewer connection. Is it pressurized sewer? Or do you have enough pitch?
This is all low pressure, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
All of the back shore is.
Okay. Thank you. I don't know if you were there, Greg. I can't see you behind this. Thank you. Any other topics to discuss before we close the public hearing? Nope, mute.
Classic. I think I'd like to see some clarification from both the engineering department and the fire department on their reviews. They did have that initial review. It may be a benefit to the applicant as well, depending upon how things work out in terms of hydrant extension. And otherwise, John, you're assuming there's no issue with like existing culvert location, depth of utility. You'll be able to satisfy the cover requirements for water and sewer.
I see no issue with that. Where we do have that culvert, there's always that small section that could be insulated to properly provide or go underneath the culvert. So that will be determined during construction.
And Greg, is the conditions that the responses you're looking for later on in the process, or is something you want to see?
I think it'll relate to potentially utility design, just to have the engineering department adequate time to review that.
Okay.
They may have suggestions or modifications, as well as from the fire chief on hydrant location. That one issue of how it descends with that little reveal, if that's a concern for the board or not, whether there's any type of additional barrier that's required on I guess it's the north side of the roadway as you come down there. If it or if it was something that John considered and doesn't think that it's necessary.
So from my perspective, Mr. Chairman and the members of the board, I see no issue with that. We have a very gradual pitch coming in from Atlantic Road and an equally subtle minimum pitch coming toward the T turnaround. So 4% and 5% respectively as shown on the profile. So I'm sorry, 4% and 3% as shown on the profile. So I don't see that from a vertical standpoint. As far as the vehicular, safety on the sides, again, the boulder wall, once that's brought up and this pervious surface is put in, with a 6-inch reveal, I don't see any issue with that. But I guess I can defer to the engineering department if they want to see something further. But again, this is a private road, and as Beverly pointed out, this is basically a driveway. It would have, as Greg, you may recall, we actually considered coming in with a common driveway application, but this is, I think, is a tighter application in terms of approval. So whatever the engineering department prefers us to do, we can certainly do it.
Thank you, John. Jane?
Yes, are we closing the hearing or continuing the hearing?
I thought you were going to ask a question. You had that. hand
Oh,
up.
no.
Ask a question. So I am going to close the public hearing, seeing no further comments. Any further discussion amongst board members? Seeing none.
Okay.
Oh, Beverly,
I
at
do,
the buzzer.
can, if there's a little bit of unresolved issues, can we make it a condition of approval if we do approve that any outstanding issues, engineering, fire department are resolved? Or do we have to wait till they're raised and the applicant responds before we can vote? I think that gets to the crux of what Jane is getting at, and I just want to know what's a reasonable approach.
I think the latter. I mean, it's 2 weeks, but I just want to make sure that, there isn't anything that is going to cause for a revision. And if there is, then that might also be able to be accommodated in advance of the meeting next week or 2 weeks from now.
So close the public hearing and then we have further discussions next week when you get the results from the engineering and the fire chief. Yes.
I think that makes sense. And I think, in pre-application, and I think we also, displayed, which I can also display again, the aerials of it. If folks have been by, it's pretty evident. There's 2 columns. And is there any adjustment to the columns over as it becomes the subdivision road, or are those going to remain?
You mean at the entrance?
At the entrance?
No, there's no intent to do that, Greg. I can discuss that with Frank, but yeah, I don't see that being needed.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
So would it be appropriate to reopen the meeting and simply continue to the next meeting? Or just not?
I think, because it's going to be testimony if it's submitted in writing. So I think it would probably be appropriate to keep it open.
Okay, so
Okay.
reopen the public meeting.
Great.
And I'll accept the motion to continue from Jane.
I move that we continue the public hearing for the 3-lot definitive subdivision application at 277 Atlantic Road, Assessors Map 76, Lot 50.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Sean. Roll call vote, please.
Member Noonan, Member McCarl,
Yes.
Member Bookin,
Yes,
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
Member Remsen.
Yes.
Thank you, folks. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Okay, next on the agenda is a second public hearing pursuant to section 20 of chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 in accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law 40A, section 9, and of the Gloucester zoning ordinance, section 1.8.3 and 5.13. Gloucester Planning Board to consider an application submitted by New Singular Wireless PCS LLC and DBA AT&T for a wireless communications facility special permit to install a small cellular installation on National Grid utility pole proximate to 232 Atlantic Street, Assessors Map 256, Lot 52. I believe we have a representative for all the letters that we just talked about.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, my name is Ed Parry. It's P-A-R-E. I am an attorney at Brown Rudnick, One Financial Center, Boston, Massachusetts. And I'm here representing New Singular Wireless PCS LLC, which operates as AT&T, and that's the way I'll refer to them. Just a quick reminder for the board, I was here in October of 2020 with a similar type proposal. In that instance, we were using a utility pole and we're going to replace the pole. In this instance, we're fortunate enough that the existing pole will accommodate the small antennas at the top, so we don't have to replace it. Greg, should I share my screen, or do you have our plans?
You could share if you'd like, if you want to drive.
Yep, we'll do. Everybody see that?
Yep.
Plans? Okay, this is an overhead. It's not terribly helpful other than to give a sense of where we're proposing this. Atlantic Avenue comes into the beach parking lot here in this area. And I'll scroll down a little bit, hopefully not make anybody nauseous as to where the installation's proposed. But this is just an overhead shot. Here is the Beach Club building here. The utility pole that we're looking to attach to is this little circle just to the left or to the east of the building itself. And below that is a photograph of the utility pole, which we'll be using. Similar to the installation we did on Thatcher, AT&T's installation will require a mounting bracket, and then there'll be 2 canisters with antennas. These are 10 inches in diameter. These small antennas are placed inside a shroud at this lower level. The top antenna, which is a canister mount, is 24 inches in height. So the existing pole is 34 feet tall. With the mount and the antennas on the top, we'll raise it to 39 feet, 5 inches to the top. So about 5.5 foot extension to the top of the antenna. There will be cables, fiber cables that will run down to our equipment cabinet. The equipment radio units are placed inside a cabinet, which is secured. The cabinet will be located at least 11.5 feet above ground level. And of course, the utility wants to capture our electricity use. So there'll be a meter and a shut-off circuit breaker in between in the event that the system has to be shut down. The last page of the plan is just the depictions of each of the components, the antenna that I mentioned up at the top, the shroud with the 3 smaller antennas below that, and this is the equipment cabinet with the radios on the inside. Let me see, I'm going to try to switch here for 1 second. Hang on. How's that? Can you see an overhead view again of the
Yes.
beach area? Okay, thank you. So this is just to recap the need for the site. So the pole is in the center of the red circle here along the beach parking lot again. The next screen I'll show you is the current AT&T coverage in the area. We have very little coverage down in the area. Poor connectivity generally. The beach is not well covered, nor any of the houses or the areas nearby. What AT&T is trying to do is to effectuate green where we have high connectivity and high data rates. So this is the existing situation. And this would be the coverage from this, even from this small installation on the top of a utility pole, where we'll get much better connectivity in the green area, and even in the blue area, we'll have high connectivity with moderate data rates. So, we'll get a good deal of coverage here and along the beach. These small cell facilities are designed to provide a small footprint of coverage and capacity. So when things get crowded and the AT&T network gets overloaded, these small cell facilities will offload. We did file materials demonstrating how we satisfy each of these special permit requirements and standards, and likewise a report relating to the emissions showing that the facility will in fact comply with the FCC standards regarding emissions. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I don't want to drone on. I think the board's relatively familiar with these, but I'd be happy to answer any questions or go into any details that the board members of the public are interested in.
Great. Thank you, Ed. Questions from board members? We did 3 last time, Ed, is that right? 2 or 3?
I believe we've done 2. The most recent was October of 2020, where we did a similar installation in a similar location down at the beach where, the coverage is just awful.
Right. Questions from board members? Mr. Parry? Hearing none, we are in a public hearing setting. Is there anybody in the audience, the attendees, that would like to speak in favor of this application for a new wireless communication facility? You can raise your hand button and you'll be recognized. Seeing none, anybody that would like to speak against the application for this wireless communication facility? Seeing none. Greg, anything different that we should know about?
No, I think the installations that we saw last, and I do think there were three. I think there's one near the beach. There was one over on Patriot Place, and then one in the downtown area as well on Dodge Street, which was a really good opportunity for staff to learn a little bit more about these facilities. We did call them out in particular when we created the amendments to the wireless communications facility ordinance. To try to facilitate them. They're no longer reviewed by the city council, they're reviewed by the planning board. I think it's also effectively, had AT&T also look at the sensitivity of the locations that they're looking to place them on. This is a remote area. It's not proximate to an existing residence. It's quite some distance. So I think the ordinance has effectively resulted in good siting of them as well. So there's no concerns from Public Works. There's no concerns from the fire department. Again, after having reviewed these technologies, and I think it's a great alternative to providing the coverage without, the unpopular siting of larger monopole installations that are typically not favorably reviewed by the public. So nothing further. Complete application. Ed does a great job. And we have this kind of unique situation too, where we'll figure out once again, the pole is owned by National Grid, with AT&T having some leasing ability on the pole in recording a decision for the board to consider.
So does city council know that we're the special permit granting authority on this one?
They do. They do.
That's good. Any further discussion before I close the public hearing? Close the public hearing. Jane, would you like to take a crack?
Yep. I move that we close the public hearing for AT&T's special permit to install a cellular installation on a National Grid utility pole at 232 Atlantic Street, Assessors Map 256, Lot 52.
So that's a motion to close the public
Close the
hearing.
hearing.
Okay. Do we have a second? Thank you. Roll call vote to close the public hearing.
Member Noonan,
Yes.
Member McCarl,
Yes.
Member Bookin,
Yes,
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
and Member Remsen.
Yes. And is there any further discussion? Are you ready to vote on the special permit?
I'm ready to go.
I make a motion that we approve AT&T's special permit application for a cellular installation at National Grid utility pole at 232 Atlantic Street, Assessors Map 256, Lot 52.
I'll second.
Thank you, Sean. Roll call vote, please.
Member Noonan,
Yes.
Member McCarl,
Yes.
Member Bookin,
yes,
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
and Member Remsen.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you very much. Nice to see everyone. Happy New Year, and
Happy
we
New Year.
appreciate the approval. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Uh-oh, hang on a second. Okay. Next is our next public hearing. So pursuant to section 20 of chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, in accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law 40A, section 5, the Gloucester and the Gloucester zoning ordinance, section 1.11, the Gloucester Planning Board to consider a petition submitted by Jeffrey Calderjohn, amend the Gloucester zoning ordinance by rezoning 44 and 44R Concord Street, Assessors Map 229, Lot 5 and 2, approximately 6.25 acres of land from R20 low to medium residential district to EB extensive business district. I believe we have Attorney Nestor here representing the applicant. Good evening.
Good morning, good evening, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Just for the record, my name is Mark Nestor, I'm an attorney practicing 45 Middle Street in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I do in fact represent Jeffrey Calderjohn and Eric Holdsworth, the trustees of Tyler's Farm Trust. We're seeking here to rezone, which is currently R20, is, as you said, about a 6.5 acre lot into extensive business. These gentlemen have been registered as a farm business on this property for approximately 20 years, and they've owned it for about approximately 20 years. And what they're seeking to do in the primary lot, which is 44R, is approximately 5+ acres of open land. And the 44 is approximately 1+ acres, which has a single family house on it already. We abut just to the south, the Wingershik Inn and Hotel, which is already zoned as extensive business. Our primary abutters are to the southwest, which is the Cape Ann Animal Aid, and the city of Gloucester, which is West Parish School and Elementary School. We are seeking to do that primarily because my clients are seeking to expand the use of the yard to potentially put in a contractor's yard and a boat storage facility. They believe, and they've been told by others, there's a real need for a contractor's yard, which would have some building supplies on site. Their entrance to the street is approximately on 100 yards from Route 128. We would anticipate that most of the traffic that would come in and out of the property would go in through 128 and not go further down on Concord Street through West Parish and onto 133. There was an issue raised. We had a P&D meeting yesterday, and as a result of which there's going to be a site visit on January 13th at the site with the P&D committee as well as invited public regarding the septic system. We provided the Board of Health that in fact was recently inspected and there's a conditional pass. There's a question regarding the flow of water, which we're addressing with the Board of Health offline. I did attach in a supplemental letter to the board a list of approximately 21 individuals who supported the petition. And just for the record, as a result of some suggestions by the building department, we attempted to hold a meeting on our site on August 4th, 2021 to invite all the abutters to come and ask questions because we had heard through third-party sources there were some issues out there, and we offered to meet and greet with anybody there. We did have a meeting with one owner, Mr. Minton, who owns the Wingershik Inn and Hotel. He raised some issues and I think we addressed them, but unfortunately no one else appeared. So we were kind of stuck with that. So then I raised that to the B&T committee yesterday. So I anticipate that there'll be some abutters out when the P&D does a site visit, and if we have to, we can address them if there's any issues out there. But it's essentially open land that we want to rezone, and so we'll butt up against the Wingershik Beach property, which is already extensive business. And to the north of the property is essentially Route 128. Do I have any questions of the planning board?
Greg, if you wanted to offer a little color first, and maybe if you can pull up a GIS. I don't know that we had something in the submission that would be helpful to sort of visualize.
Sure. The only thing that was in the submission was the attached abutters list, but I can call up the property. Bear with me.
Yeah.
Greg, can you overlay the zoning when you do it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Just for that, everything surrounding is R20 except for the Wingershik Beach property, which is extensive business.
You mean the Wingershik Beach Hotel, motel?
That's
Is that what
correct.
you're referring to? Thank you.
Yes. And that's officially 46 and 46R Concord Street.
Everybody can see that.
Yes.
So these are the two properties. This is 44R, sorry, 44 Concord Street and 44R 128. This is all zoned R20 residential, and the the motel property is zone extensive business.
And so the two parcels are owned by the same entity, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so is it proposed to rezone both 44 and 44R?
Yes.
Okay. And so currently there is a residence on 44.
I understand, looking at the statute for an extensive business, the comment is that normally residential is not generally approved, but it's, again, that the house has been there, as I understand it, for quite a long period of time, well before it was even, so I guess this thing used to be, was only rezoned back in the 70s to R20, or just before my clients bought it in the 80s.
Okay.
But there's a house there already on, which is right about down there.
So yes, there is a residential parcel or house. And,
Yes.
okay, and you're proposing to rezone both the 44 and 44R.
There was a question was raised on that yesterday in the P&D, and I'm discussing that there's pros and cons of both ways. And I would anticipate having an answer before the next P&D meeting.
Okay.
What they also do out of there right now is they run a landscaping business, which is probably kind of falls under the definition of the agriculture and farming under 128.14.
Okay. So why don't we take questions from board members first? And then my sense is that we need to get boots on the ground and have a look-see at this parcel before we go down any further.
Well, as I said, we already have a P&D boots on the ground on January 13th at 3:30.
Correct. So that's P&D. This is planning board. So I'd like to take some questions from our members before we contemplate a planning board site visit.
That's fine.
On this rezoning issue. Jane?
Yep, I just have a quick clarification. I just want to confirm that the reason you're rezoning here is because you're using the property in a way that is not permitted under R20. And in fact, you're using it to store cars and boats and have landscaping activities, which would in fact be permitted in EB, except for the residential house. Is that, so you're trying to clear the zoning violation, cure the zoning violation by changing the zone. Is that correct?
Well, the issue has been raised regarding whether they do landscaping plus ag, in which there's a question whether the landscaping work falls under the agricultural. Technically in R20, you can do agricultural work without a permit. But the question is, because of the landscaping work, does it fall under it? The vehicles that are there are only their vehicles. I know there was a question raised yesterday whether there's any boats stored, and there were 3 boats, which I looked at today, and it's been represented to me by the owners that the boats are owned by them. At this point, they are not, as I understand it, not storing any third-party boats or vehicles. A lot of the vehicles are used primarily for the landscaping, and a lot of these vehicles are gone, and what's over here is loam, and there's crushed rock over here, and there's some wood chips over here when I went out and walked the site this morning. And a lot of these vehicles that are there are no longer there. One of the issues was raised by the building inspector, and so I know they have removed some of the vehicles already, and the building inspector, Greg Cepolo, testified yesterday he's going out to the site and that they are making strong efforts to remove some vehicles to get more in compliance.
Okay, so you're trying to cure a zoning violation where you're basically using it as a place for your the landscaping business to work out of. So like the contractor's yard?
Well, see, when you have the contractor's yard, if we do the landscaping, it's primarily our own business. When the contractor's yard, we can then bring in loam and crushed rock, which we can then sell. We can sell retail if necessary. So that would clearly not be under the farming/agricultural exemption that we have now. So yes, we want to, it's been suggested to expand to a contractor's yard because they have the space and because the location is right off of a collector street off of 128. So it's one of the locations, and as I understand it, what's been represented to me is there are very few contractors' yards within the city. So we're going to go more commercial, which is why we need the extensive business. Because we can't do a contractor's yard under R20.
Thank you.
Any other points of clarification?
Chairman,
Sean?
just to clarify, the existing dwelling that's there, is that currently in use? And would the plan be going forward if the rezoning is granted that the house would remain in use? Or
Well,
is the house going to be the use of the property discontinued for residential use?
well, I mean, that's the issue that I'll be discussing with my clients after that was raised yesterday. I mean, normally in an extensive business, you can't have a residential use, but the key word is generally not allowed. And because that building has been there so long, is it grandfathered in? And quite truthfully, I haven't had a chance to take a look at it. Or the other issue is, do we spin off 44 Concord and just go forward on 44R Concord, which is clearly just open space, has no residential on it. It is currently it's rented out as an apartment. And that's where the issue of the septic system that was raised by the Board of Health, which is why we had Richard Clark go on to an inspection and gave it a conditional pass.
Beverly?
Well, but if you just use 44R, you're going to have to provide some access to Concord through 44, right?
I understand that, and they're already on the existing plans. This is a separate access back to 44R versus the driveway for 44, which is over here.
Do you want to show that again? I'm sorry. Show what would be the access.
This is the access. This is the current access for 44R.
Gotcha.
And there's on the plan of land for the property, that's been on the plan since I have a 1964 plan, and there's a separate driveway here for 44.
For the house.
That's correct.
Okay. And it would, but if you had that plan, and I think you have to make a decision before you move forward. If you have that plan, it's in the same ownership, at least now.
Right.
But wouldn't you, because they would be in different zones, if you don't rezone 44, but you rezone 44R, would there have to be some easement or something in case 44 got sold?
That's why we're looking at, that was raised yesterday, and Greg kind of chimed in on it too. That's why I'm having a discussion this week with my clients on that before. We want to have it resolved before the site visit next Thursday.
All right.
So
We would ideally like to keep it together and have both, but I just need to make sure whether logistically we can do it and at the same time keep the house. And I have to do a little more research on what I need to do if I have to keep the house, if in fact it's zoned extensive business, only because it's been grandfathered in there.
Jane,
This is my last question.
that's fine.
Um,
I didn't say that like that because it's another question. I'm just.
If you were successful in getting the approval from the planning board to rezone this to EB, maybe this is a question for Greg, I don't know. I know you're in violation currently with a $300 a day fine, which into my calculation adds up to something like $50,000, a little bit over. So what happens to that fine that's owed?
Is this, it's to me or to Greg?
I
think
don't know.
yeah, it's more a question. I don't know how the citation of the building department was presented. I don't know if they've identified fines as well. Typically there's some form of a resolution. Very often the threat of fines is to resolve the violation. I'm not sure in this situation if it would be something that would be forgiven. I don't know.
I mean, it's in our packet. There's a zoning violation.
Right.
You are in violation and you owe $300 a day.
Oh, okay.
The representation of Greg Cefalo from the building department yesterday was that they had not yet imposed the fine. His comment was the policy of the building department is try to work with the owners to resolve the problem versus impose the fine. So I don't think, but I will defer to what Mr. Cefalo would finally say, that they have not yet formally imposed the fines. It's more the threat of the fines. And he's testified, he's been out there a number of times and observed the improvement to the site since he first started. But I would defer to him for the final decision by the building inspector.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board members? We are in a public, oh, go ahead, Sean, at the buzzer.
Along Jane's line of questioning, in addition to the zoning, the use violations, is there any sort of current violations or past violations with Concom for the clearing that's taken place? Or was that not an issue?
I know of none. I had no issues with Concom. The only issue I have with, I know of, is the building inspector, and I've been dealing with the Board of Health because there was a question whether the septic system had flunked or passed on 44, and this is why we had Dick Clark go on and run the test, and he gave a conditional pass, which he submitted to Max Schenk a couple of days ago. Max raised an issue that the water flow seemed to be higher than 2 bedrooms, but he couldn't tell whether there was a leak or not, so he was going to look into that further with my clients and Mr. Clark in the coming weeks.
Any follow-up, Sean? Thank you. At this point of the public hearing, I'd like to take public comment from attendees. I'd like to take comment first of anybody that'd like to speak in favor of this particular rezoning exercise at 44 and 44R Concord Street.
I'm not sure if you gave that clarification before a hand was raised, but
Well, I think it was raised before, but why don't we permission Mary Ann and just have her state her name and address for the record, full name, please.
Sure.
Sorry, I raised my hand in error.
Okay.
Now's your time, Mary Ann. Okay, so we can lower her hand. Thank you. Anybody like to speak in favor of the proposed rezoning? Seeing none, like anybody that would like to speak opposed to the rezoning of 44 and 44R Concord Street? Uh-oh, here we go. So why don't we recognize Kate Stewart? Again, please state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Kate Stewart. I live at 30 Concord Street, which is just down the road from this plot. I would prefer not to have, sorry, I apologize. I have a 2-year-old that is with me. So I would like to just, object to having extensive business zone like so close to my house, because like there's so much activity already on the road. There's the school, the beach. Oscar, please. There's this. Okay. There's the beach, the school. There's a fire station right across the street from my house. There's a 128 exit. Like, it's just already very loud and already really too much. And I just feel like when I think about having a contractor's lot, like, and just trucks rumbling by, like filled with whatever, I would rather not have it not be in my neighborhood. And furthermore, like, I attended a community meeting about this issue, I think in April, with Sean Nolan and Jen Holgram, and gave my email and never heard anything else. And I realized that that's not your responsibility, but I would have attended like other meetings and this meeting that the gentleman representing 44 and 44R, like, I had no idea that there was an opportunity to speak, and ask questions and say, no, thank you. So I would say, if it was up to me, I would say no.
Okay. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. Let's recognize Jen Holgram, please.
Hi, yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much. I won't belabor the point because I know I sent an email in and Janine Harris, who lives across the street from this property, also sent in an email, which I'm hoping you received. I live at 385 Magnolia Ave, so I am a West Gloucester resident, and I worked with Sean Nolan on this when I was on the city council. Just a couple of things. Attorney Nestor, both tonight and last night, did not mention that there are residential abutters to these properties as well, and I realize that they don't have as much land space as the city of Gloucester or the Cape Ann Animal Aid, but they certainly are on the abutters list. And I also would like to say that as far as the community meeting went, that was in May, and the tenant at 44 Concord Street was invited. Councilor Nolan actually put a notice on that person's door. So that is all I have to say. I am opposed to these proposed zoning changes. Oh, and one more thing. If the zoning changes are not approved, and perhaps the city council is the better venue to ask this question, what does the property owner have planned to remove the fill that is there and to finally remediate the zoning violations that have occurred? Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I'd like to recognize either John or Joanne Burlingham, please. Again, state your name and address for the record.
Hear me?
Yes, sir. Gotta re-hit your mute button, please, John.
Oh, unmute. Okay.
Okay.
Are we there now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. This is my first time in this.
Well,
We are on a butter, and the pictures that were shown of the property just a few minutes ago are quite old, I believe, because a lot's been changed up there since those pictures were taken. I have a junkyard in back of my house, approximately 20 vehicles. And I wrote up a little thing here, and I'm going to read it really quick because that's the quickest way to do this. In our opinion, the zoning change is an attempt to bypass violations of zoning. The laws, by changing the laws governing the zoning on the property. There's been absolutely zero attempt to clean it up. They took out all these cars and vehicles that were behind my house during the summer, and most all of them are back now. There's over 20 trucks, cars, boats, campers, and I can see them. I'm looking out the window. If it wasn't dark, I'd be looking right at them behind my house. And also Mary Ann's house and Harmon's house there, and anybody else can see across the street can see them. The continued violations of the property, such as boat storage, extensive filling with RAP, which is grindings from the streets and local roads and beyond, create increased drainage into wetlands. I'm a former shellfish constable, and I know that that drainage has pipes that go into Piggery Creek, which enters into Little River. And that's all stuff, whatever comes off that property, it's going to wind up in Piggery Creek. There's 3 pipes, one from behind the school to the cemetery, one under the school, and one behind my wife and my house. One of the trucks out back is a box truck, used to belong to Tony's Fruitland. That never left, that's still there. Much of this is all readily visible, from my and my neighbor's properties next door. And Mr. Goldajohn has been on my property approximately 4 times. By invitation, I invited him in, there's no problem there, we talk. Trying to get my wife and I to agree with allowing him to operate a business on the property. He denies just about all you have said about the things except boat storage. He claims everything else is gone. Of course, I can see it, it's not. He also stated to me several times he's going to build an industrial building on the property, backed up against the highway. Right now, all we have is a junkyard with a lot of capabilities to create pollution to the wetlands, Clam Flats and Piggery Creek, Little River. In the long run, it's going to affect my property values and all our property values in the neighborhood. This just is not a good thing. There's nothing to do on the property with tree farm zoning. Tree farm zoning is listed by the state. I looked it up. And he has to do stuff that involves trees and wood.
Cut them all down.
And my wife's concerned because he cut all the trees down, which he did when he leveled part of the property and backfilled it all so they could store all that junk that's out there now. He was working late into the night all winter, last winter doing this. And we are going to vote definitely no. He hasn't cleaned up any of the violations he has. Why should he be allowed to do more? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
John, would you just state your address for the record?
Oh, sorry, 36 Concord Street, and we have lived here for over 36 years.
That's appropriate then. Thank you. So Robert Smith is next to be recognized, please. Sir, the floor is yours. Just name and address for the record. Just got to find the mute button, bottom left-hand corner.
Unmute. I got it. Am I here now?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Robert Smith. I live at 38 Concord Street with my wife and 3 sons. We live directly adjacent to the subject property. We are very much opposed of the rezoning of 44 and 44R Concord Street. There is already a great deal of traffic that uses this end of Concord Street as a shortcut from Essex Ave to 128. Reclassifying this address to business is only going to make the difference, only going to make traffic situation that much worse. Concord Street is narrow, windy, no sidewalks. The entire street is lined with houses subject from the property to West Parish School. In his application letter, Attorney Nesson notes that the primary abutters to the subject property are Cape Ann Animal Aid, West Parish School, Wingashi Hotel, and Route 128. Sorry, he does not mention the Harmons, Gene Harris, the Burlinghams, or the Smiths, all of which are residential homes. If you look at the application for rezoning, each of these properties are directly adjacent to the subject property. Attorney Nesta also referred to an invitation to the abutters to attend a meeting at his office on August 4th of 2021. However, he did fail to mention that the letters were dated July 29th and 26th. This is not significant time or enough planning or promptly planning for a meeting if you really expect or want anyone to attend. Also included in Attorney Nessa's applications are multiple names of individuals who have signed a pension of support. You will note that none of these signatures are people that actually live in the direct vicinity of the property. I watched the planning board and direct committee meeting last night. It was stated several times that rezoning the property would correct the issues that have been created by the owners. I believe rezoning the property after they have done work that was not legally allowed would be doing a grave injustice to the system. Even if we're not necessarily opposed to the use of the land as for contractor, yard, or boat storage facility, if it were to be rezoned as a business, it would be no longer controlling. There would be no controlling the use of the property for the next owner. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah. So I guess the question I'd like to ask, Robert, if you're still there, did you receive an abutters notice of this public hearing?
Yes.
Okay. And I assume the other folks did as well, even though they weren't included on the abutters notice or the abutters list.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any other attendees that'd like to speak in opposition? Here we go. Okay, seeing none at the moment. Oh, there's one, keeps coming in and going out. Greg, can you see who's trying to pop up? There she is, Nancy. So I'd like to recognize Ryan. Again, Ryan, I'd like to have you state your first and last name for the record. And I don't know where you went. Oh, there you are. First and last name for the record and street address, please, sir.
Hi, my name is Nancy Hilsey, and I live at 41 Concord Street. My husband is Richard Hilsey. We've lived here approximately 23 years. I just wanted to say that through this summer and spring, when this gentleman, I don't know how to see it. When this gentleman had whatever workshop he was doing through in the woods, the heavy trucks that came through with rock, the noise, the increased in, I'm not quite sure what it was, motorcycles, all kinds of things. There was all kinds of activity. It was loud and fairly inappropriate. And I don't know how somebody gets to do that in a residential area. You buy property, it's residential, you build a home, residential. We abided by all the rules that were applicable at the time we built and bought. And yet that all goes out the window because somebody else thinks they have land that can be used for storage of what seems to be more equipment. The zoning for residential would not constitute somebody to be able to have that type of, why wouldn't they look at Condolin Way or another set of properties somewhere where business and equipment and noise go hand in hand? As opposed to Concord Street, a very small street, a very populated street, residential. Bottom line, we say no.
Okay. Well, you touched on a very simple principle that the planning board works on all the time, and that's predictability in zoning. And so you're exactly right. It is not predictable to have heavy equipment, trucks moving in and out in an R20 zone. So I appreciate you magnifying that for us, ma'am. Thank you. Anybody else like to speak in opposition? You can lower her hand. Thank you. So will the board here, I think a site visit would be appropriate. I don't know if we want to try to do it simultaneously with the planning and development date on the 13th. I did get an email. I don't know, Mark, can you recall the time of that site visit?
3:30.
3:30. Okay. What's the will of the planning board on a site visit for 44 and 44R?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I won't be in town on the 13th, but I was on the P&D Zoom call last night, and one of the things that Councilor Gilman mentioned was that they try to make a real effort to limit the size or the number of people at each of their site visits. So it might be better, they may appreciate it more if we actually do our own site visit on another time or date.
Okay. What in general feeling for site visit from our planning board? Is that something you'd like to entertain?
I think it's important to do a site visit.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Mark, you have your hand raised. Is there, you looking to make a rebuttal?
Could I make a brief response?
Yes, of course.
Part of the problem I have is that contrary to former Council Holmgren, I had reached out to Sean Nolan back in April. And I raised the issue to him first about the rezoning and asked what he thought about it, and he was going to look around and let me know. I find out after the fact, when he knew I was representing the owners, that he held an abutters meeting. He didn't invite me. He didn't invite my clients. He may have invited the tenant, I don't know, but the tenant has no authority over the property. When I found out later that he did, I asked him for the comments of the abutters and he wouldn't give them to me. I have talked to Ms. Holmgren, and I have been aware of a number of emails one of her clients has given to her, which occurred in June and July, which is why I specifically called for a meeting on August 4th, that I mailed all the abutters a letter on July 26th to include the complainant and asked them to meet me at the site so we could discuss these issues at the site. And I asked, please RSVP. Nobody RSVP. Mr. Min showed up, that was it. That would have been a perfect opportunity to listen to the abutters' concerns and address them. No one sought to do it. I invited Sean Nolan, he didn't appear. So the problem my clients have is we're dealing with issues that we may have been able to resolve. As far as the specifics, I will let the board, they can clearly do a site visit. If you want to do it in group, I will check with my client when he can do it. And I would suggest that you have Mr. Cephalo from the building department here next time. He testified in front of the P&D that he's had numerous visits to the site since they came, and he has voiced to the board, and you can ask him to repeat them, that he's seen significant improvement. So all I'm going to do is rely on the building inspector who issued the violation to comment on what he has seen and go from there. If the board wants to do a group visit, the only issue, as I understand, is the P&D is meeting again, I believe, on the 25th. So obviously the site visit with this board will have to occur before then, but I can check with my client if the board can give me some sense of what date they'd like to do it, and see if we're available. And I agree, maybe having both committees at the same time would be tough, especially in this COVID environment.
Yes, Jane.
This is a question for Greg. Greg, what's the process here anyway? So we have a public hearing, we close the public hearing, we vote, I assume, to make a recommendation to the city council, and then they continue. I mean, we don't have to do that before their P&D meeting. I don't think that's two separate things that are happening.
You're correct. I mean, there are two independent processes as part of a zoning amendment. One is a public hearing by the planning board. The other is a public hearing by the city council. The city council is clearly looking for a recommendation from the planning board. I understand Mr. Nestor is pointing out some timeframes of additional meetings, but your process is independent, and if you choose to have a site visit, it's at the convenience of the board to do so.
Right.
The public hearing has been opened within 65 days of the referral. There are no issues with timeline. The timeline is now in the hands of the planning board and the city council to review the application and ultimately have disposition and recommendation.
Right. So I just want to remind the public that we have our process. I don't know if we'll continue the public hearing or probably have the site visit and continue the public hearing. And then we'll make a recommendation to the city council, but the city council is having their own P&D site visit, blah, blah, blah. And the P&D also makes a recommendation to the city council, and then the city council holds another public meeting. So there's plenty of time and space for the public to make further comments before this is decided.
Thank you, Jane. Beverly.
Well, I want to make some comments, but are we still in public hearing, and do we have to close the public hearing? I mean, technically, should we do that, or?
So I'm thinking that we're gonna, I think the discussion on the table at the moment is to establish a date for a site visit for anybody.
Okay, let's do that first, but then I'd like to make a couple of comments, but I don't know if it's appropriate within the public hearing or it's more appropriate after the hearing is closed, so. That's for
So we're
you
gonna-
and,
So we would establish a site visit, continue the public hearing, and then we can have discussion after the continuance. is
okay,
lifted.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Before we do all of that, I would like to recognize Jen Holgren for one brief moment, please.
One more time, and I really don't want to be inflammatory, but I do want to make the point that yesterday Attorney Nestor told P&D that he's only been involved since June or July. So I'm not sure which it is, if it's May or June or July or another month.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Okay. So people available for a site visit.
Yes, we
Who's
should go
got it?
during the day, light.
That would be a good idea. Thank you, Jane, for pointing that
Yeah,
out.
you're welcome.
Anytime.
Maybe we
afternoon-
start with, it sounded like Sean had some limitation
Yes.
next week.
That's fine, so we don't have to do it on the 13th. What, are you just gone for the day, Sean, or? So anything but the 13th?
I have commitments on the 12th. If you want me to attend with you.
We would love to have you come, Greg.
Tuesday, the 11th.
Sounds terrific. What time works in the afternoon for people? 2 o'clock,
Yep, 2 o'clock is fine. with me.
right? Good, Sean?
Yes, 2 o'clock is good. I have a 4:10 appointment out of town, but 2 o'clock works.
You can push it back to 1 if you don't want to drive fast.
Yeah, it's only in Peabody, so.
Oh, it's good. Well, it'll be 2 o'clock then. Doug, you good? Good.
I'm not available. I have a court hearing.
Okay,
That's my only concern. I can potentially do Wednesday, the 12th. I'd have to check with my client, but I think I got one of my clients available also.
Are you saying, I mean, can we go without you or
Well, I guess is
you'd
this,
like
is this
to be
a,
there?
well, is this a formal site visit like the P&D has where they invite the abutters and the neighbors? Because clearly I'm uncomfortable having other than the planning board tromping through the property. If it's going to be a formal with neighbors and abutters.
now this is for the sole benefit of the planning board. There'll be no deliberation. There'll be no questions. This is for us to see this situation on the ground. And we're not inviting the public.
If the board could do Wednesday at 2 o'clock, I can make myself available just to be there.
Okay,
I can make that time. I'll be back. I have a commitment in the middle of the day.
okay,
I could do 2 o'clock if that works for the board members.
all right. Sean, the 12th is good for you, sir? Very good. Jane, we're good on the 12th?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So you'll clear that with the property owner, Mark, and.
I will.
Okay, and just send a confirming email to Greg and we can just confirm that at your earliest convenience.
It's confirmed now, but I will send an email to Greg tomorrow morning.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I would accept a motion to close the public hearing, or I'm
Continue.
sorry, continue the public hearing.
I move that we continue the public hearing to amend the Gloucester zoning ordinance by rezoning 44 and 44R Concord Street, Assessors Map 229, lots 5 and 2.
That would be to our January 22nd or 20th.
20th.
meeting.
Yep.
20th, thank you.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. McCarl. We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Member Noonan,
Yes.
member McCarl,
Yes.
member Bookin,
Yes,
member Cook,
Yes.
member Henry,
Yes.
member Remsen.
Yes.
Okay, and folks in the audience, again, this is a continued public hearing, and as Jane pointed out in her civics lesson, there's plenty of bites at the apple to participate. So thank you for your time tonight.
Before, I think Beverly wanted to potentially have some discussion or make a comment. The only transmissions I've received are from Jen Holmgren. She also provided the 2 attachments to her email, which was distributed to the board. It's also on the public Google Drive that can be viewed through the planning board's website. So if there was also an intended submission from Janine Harris, I think that may have gone through the clerk's office to the city council. So if that's to be shared with the board, if she can provide that, and we will forward it along.
Thank you. Beverly?
Okay, I live within a mile of here, so I know the site really well. Just a couple of comments. And the first is that a zone change, in my opinion, should have a very, very high bar of approval, a demonstration that the site is better off in the new zone than it is in the zone that it's sitting in. And I think that I have to look at the criteria of approval, but certainly it seems to me that you don't do a zone change in order to fix a violation. It has to be a more robust definition, a more robust justification for the zone change. But I think that Mr. Nestor's being a little bit disingenuous about the traffic, and this does involve truck traffic, and I would imagine trucks of a certain size, medium to large. And I want to know whether or not a traffic study is going to be required. I think it's really appropriate to demonstrate what kind of impact there will be on Concord and what kind of impact will be on the access points onto 28. That's certainly a consideration, and whether it's an appropriate a site of this size converted to an extensive business use is appropriate in terms of traffic capacity. So I'm wondering if that's going to be a requirement for review.
I will certainly get to that, Jane. I'm sorry, Beverly, in our further deliberation for sure. Any other comments before we move along? Hearing none, we have a continued public hearing to deal with pursuant to section 20 of chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 in accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law 48, section 9, Mass General Law 41, Gloucester zoning ordinance, and section 5.9 cluster development, and the rules and regulations governing the subdivision of land in Gloucester. Gloucester Planning Board will hold a remote public hearing on a definitive subdivision application submitted by Upper Banjo LLC for the division of land to permit 26 single-family residential homes at 154A, 158R, and 160 Essex Ave, Assessor's Map 218, lots 38, 39, and 46. I think Joel is still with us. Probably taking the kids to bed, had dinner. Joel, the floor is yours. I'm sorry for the protracted meeting.
It happens. Sometimes it's my fault. I'm glad to
Usually,
not be blamed tonight.
usually, thank you though.
Okay, so as the board likely recalls, there was a supplemental filing made a few weeks ago in which the site drainage was retooled in response to the comments and suggestions from the third-party reviewer. It's my understanding, I'm sorry, for the record, Joel Pavaza, I'm an attorney at Seaside Legal Solutions. I'm here on behalf of Upper Banjo LLC for a cluster development proposed with a roadway proposed for Southwest Drive. Again, that submission is under review by the third-party reviewer. And although we don't expect any changes to come back from his supplemental review, we thought it was best to wait until that review was done before we presented full scale the revisions that have been made. The only issue I wanted to just briefly talk about tonight was relating to a change in requests from what was originally proposed to be off-site improvements to now be essentially waivered on-site improvements. And if I'll just share my screen real briefly, it'll take only a minute, and then we can hopefully wrap it up from there. I just want to give you kind of a preview ahead of time, so when I get back to you guys on the 20th, you're sort of ready for this. So this is the overview of Southwest Drive. Are you able to see my mouse moving around in a circle?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the area I want to focus on is this portion, the northeastern corner of the proposal as the roadway heads toward Essex Avenue. And this is the same area, the view's been rotated. So now we have, I believe, north is heading to the right of the screen. Essex Avenue is here. The layout of Malcolm Road is here. And so originally, we had proposed Southwest Drive to, intercept the layout of Malcolm Road. And then we were calling Malcolm Road improvements off-site improvements. There's widening and grade correction work going on within this layout. It does not meet the subdivision standards. The rest of the proper roadway does meet the standards. This is maxed out to what physics and geometry will allow from where Essex Avenue is to where Malcolm Road is today. And an interesting legal issue was brought up by one of the neighbor's attorneys, and to solve that issue, rather than call this, rather than have Southwest tie into what is shown as Malcolm Road, Southwest is just going to run all the way down, overlapping with Malcolm Road and intercept Essex Avenue on its own. It's a technical distinction. The roadway will still look the way it's being shown, but because the layout of Southwest will now travel all the way down to Essex Avenue, this particular area of Southwest is now the only part of Southwest that will not comply strictly with the grading requirements of the subdivision rules and regulations. And so rather than this being categorized as off-site improvements within Malcolm Road, this will now just need a few waivers from the regulations so that it can be considered part of Southwest Drive leading up through the rest of the subdivision. And just, again, that was just because there's a legal issue out there relating to calling it Malcolm Road. And to avoid that, we just have to recategorize it as Southwest Drive all the way to Essex Avenue. And we can get into more detail when we go through the rest of the presentation. But I just wanted you to be aware on the 20th, when I start asking for waivers that we hadn't requested before, as to why. Nothing's actually changing about the design of the roadway at this point. It's because we're now categorizing it differently than we were before, and suddenly these waivers come into play. So I'll stop sharing my screen there. And otherwise, that's all I really need to talk about tonight from my perspective. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have in the immediate. Otherwise, I just respectfully request to continue to the 20th, at which time we can hopefully dive back in and maybe even wrap up.
Okay, if I'm inclined, Jane, to accept the motion to continue unless people had questions on the technical discussion of Malcolm Road and Southwest.
Hello?
I'm ready to continue.
Thank you, Jane.
All right, I make a motion, I move that we continue the public hearing on the definitive subdivision application by Upper Banjo LLC at 154A, 158R, and 160 Essex Ave, Assessor's Map 218, lots 38, 39, and 46.
We have a motion.
I'll second.
Thank you, sir. We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please. Yes.
Member McCarl,
Yes.
Member Bookin,
Yes.
Member Cook,
Yes.
Member Henry,
Yes.
and Member Remsen.
Yes.
Thanks, Joel.
Thank you.
Okay, at this late hour, we do have other business. It's a road improvement plan release of covenant for 15 Hutchins Court, Assessor's Map 125, Lot 120. I believe Greg and I are both getting same day late submissions via email on this topic.
I did receive one final email from the representative. They understand that there's still a little bit more work to be done in presenting this to the board, as this is the final release of covenant for the 4-lot road improvement at Hutchins Court. So there was some, it was a site visit made prior to the holiday break. And there were a couple of things that were pointed out that needed to be clarified, as well as receiving a certification from the design engineer on the project overall. And those items still remain. So they've asked to continue that to the 20th. So there's no action needed by the board. It'll just be placed on the agenda if they are prepared to present to the board on the 20th.
Fantastic.
You mean lot 102, not lot 120, by the way?
Did I say lot 20?
Rick said lot 120. It just
Oh.
says assessors
125,
map
yeah.
125 lot 102.
Right. Okay, so no action needed. Any other comments?
About that?
Well, just about anything.
Yeah, I want to say that Greg did a super job last night presenting the zoning ordinance changes.
Right.
You crushed it, Greg.
Thank you.
In isolation, nonetheless. Hank, I'd let you make a motion.
Move to adjourn. Move to adjourn.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second, please.
Second,
Thank you. Beverly, all in favor? We'll roll call vote it.
Member Noonan,
Yes.
member McCarl,
Yes.
member Bookin,
yes.
member Cook,
Yes.
member Henry,
Yes.
and member Remsen.
I have a,
Yes.
I have a comment.
Henry, thought we were leaving.
Well, I know, but I have a comment for the benefit of the board. I just got a phone call. There's a parking ban on for the city tomorrow.
Yes.
And I it just came through on that phone call. I just wanted to let everybody know in case you missed it.
That's his ham operator thing. It's like irresistible. He can't help but disseminate the information.
I'm trying to help out.
Thanks, Hank.
Right. Involuntary, actually.
Enjoy the snow. That's
Yes.
my plan.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a
Don't
great
park
day.
downtown.
Take
Happy
care.
New Year.
Take care. Happy New Year.